Hi there, I'm Jerry Hans with Friends of Griffith Park, and welcome to the results presentation for the 7th Annual Los Angeles Raptor Study. The study continues to mature from its humble beginnings in 2017. This year, the Raptor study benefited with the addition of Noree Katz to handle outreach, in addition to her great work in the field. We continue to learn new tactics in the field for finding and monitoring nests, which further contributes to the huge breadth of the data we've accumulated over the 7 years. I was especially impressed this year with volunteers who went the extra mile, sometimes literally, to find new territories and nests. A lot of them were seasoned volunteers, but quite a few were first-year volunteers. So a big thank you from Friends of Griffith Park to all of the volunteers. Please consider signing on as a community science volunteer next year, and we hope to see you at the volunteer dinner party on Saturday in Griffith Park. I do have an important announcement to make. Regrettably, Courtney McCammon will be stepping away from the study. As you know, Courtney was hired to the position of City Rec and Parks ecologist 2 years ago, and she's done an amazing job. However, her workload is extensive. For this reason, she will focus on the 450 city parks she's responsible for and free herself from the many hours she spends on the Raptor study. And I recognize that many of you have developed a close relationship with Courtney. These are really huge shoes to fill, but we're going to figure it out. And of course, we will continue to support Courtney's work in our city parks and help her protect flora and fauna and educate the public. A quick shout out to Friends of Griffith Park board members, Catherine Louise and Brenda Rees, who will be updating the Raptor study and resources webpage very soon to include the 2023 final results. Noree will be sending out an email when the new content is posted to the site. We hope you'll join Friends of Griffith Park in other programming and work as well. If you'd like to support us, we have just opened up our annual membership roster for year 2024. So now let me introduce the rest of the Raptor study team. Our Raptor study director is Dr. Dan Cooper. Dan has PhD with work completed at UCLA after study at Harvard and UC Riverside. And Dan holds the position of Senior Conservation Ecologist with the Resource Conservation District of Santa Monica Mountains. Dan is Friends of Griffith Park's Scientific Director, and he's overseen about a dozen surveys and studies in Griffith Park as part of our efforts to protect the park through science. Almost all of these surveys and studies reside on our website, and he's made a huge impact in documenting Griffith Park's natural resources. Noree Katz holds an MBA and Master's in Public Policy from UCLA after doing her undergraduate work in environmental education at Humboldt State. She's conducting research as part of her PhD program via Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at UCLA. Her work will build on the Raptor study and address urban biodiversity. Noree is also UCLA's first Chief Sustainability Officer and is also an LA DWP Commissioner. So to keep this tidy tonight, we'd appreciate all questions going to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen and not to the chat, please. So I'll turn it over to Dan now. And again, welcome and thanks for coming tonight.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. And welcome, everyone. I see a lot of familiar names of folks I've met in the field. And it looks like we have a lot of our 2023 volunteers at the show tonight. So that's great. Okay, so as Jerry said, we'll be presenting, but I do want to acknowledge Courtney's great contributions over the last 7 years. Courtney was really integral in setting up this study. She had done work in Orange County and with the Irvine Ranch Company and helped develop the methodology. And I know a lot of you were trained by her. And in addition, she spent a lot of time searching for nests herself and keeping our spreadsheets updated. So I just want to definitely acknowledge her great contributions. All right, let's kick it off. And Narit's going to be controlling the slides, and I'll be nattering away. And then we're going to switch, and then Narit will take over the remainder of the slides. All right, so a lot of you know the purpose of the study is to study these important indicator species, the raptors of LA. We're hoping to develop and add to this baseline data set of nesting raptors throughout Los Angeles. We're interested in minimizing human-wildlife conflict while still encouraging recreation throughout the city and really just living throughout the city. We're using the information that we gleaned from our raptor study to inform management, including within city parks. And later in the talk, you'll hear of some direct results where our monitoring was used by Rec and Parks with actually a really good outcome. These results will be contributing to regional species assessments. And last year, Courtney and I presented at the American Ornithological Society's annual meeting in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and led a workshop on nesting raptors. And this fall, next month, Narit and I will go to Albuquerque and present at the Raptor Research Foundation some of the nest reuse data that we've been collecting, or that you've been collecting. All right. So as you know, our study area is divided up by these subregions, and it extends basically from the Sepulveda Basin in the northwest, east to the San Rafael Hills in the western edge of Pasadena, south through the hills of El Sereno and East LA, down to about Vernon, and then west across downtown into the Slauson District, past Exposition Park, and into the Baldwin Hills. We have not extended west to the 405 throughout most of the study area, but maybe in the future we shall. Just to review the key species we'll be focusing on, we've got 4 common raptors that nest in across our study area. One of the most familiar is the red-tailed hawk. These red-tailed hawks, as a lot of you know, have highly variable plumages. They are territorial a lot of the year, but they do their displays starting in late fall, when you'll see them paired up and dangling their legs and tandem flying around. Like all of our raptors, they stay paired throughout the year. We are very interested in how territories are being reused every year or not being reused every year. And as you'll see in the results, they do a lot of nest reuse, and especially territory reuse. They're very faithful to their nest sites. The Cooper's hawk is another common species in LA. It's a more urban hawk. It's slim in build, medium-sized, long tail with bands. It's preys on a lot of small birds and mid-sized birds like pigeons, but increasingly, particularly in urban areas, it's taking a lot of raptors and even fox squirrels, things as large, taking a lot of rats and mammalian prey as large as fox squirrels. Formerly, it would have nested in riparian areas of woodland, but now it's adapted very well to our urban forest, where it's nesting in our street trees. And some of the most popular street trees for Cooper's hawk are ash trees. The red-shouldered hawk is our most uncommon hawk. It is very localized. We have a couple dozen breeding pairs every year around the city versus over 100 of Coopers and over 100 of redtail. These birds are sit-and-wait predators. They'll sit up on a pole like this and drop down on prey. They feed on a variety of food, a pretty huge variety, including a lot of reptiles and even amphibians, and even crayfish, such as along the LA River. They are paired year-round like red-tailed hawk, and you'll hear more about them. Great horned owls. Great horned owls are nest thieves. They don't build their own nests. They build their nests in other birds' nests, including common raven. We didn't really monitor common raven in this study. We haven't. We may in the future, but great horned owls it turns out, are pretty common in our study area, found in both urban areas and natural habitat. They're nocturnal hunters. So during the day, they're just hanging out on branches very quietly. Their diet consists almost entirely of mammals because that's really what's active at night, and what they like to catch. You can see the bones of these mammals in pellets below their roost and nest sites. Then we have some really uncommon raptors in our study area, including the American kestrel. The kestrel was the most common raptor 100 years ago in LA, but now it has dropped to almost nothing. We've got single digit territories each year between 1 and 4. I think this year we had 4 kestrel territories, possibly. We did have successful breeding this year, that we confirmed solidly for the first time in a while. These birds bred successfully at Betty Davis Park along the LA River in Burbank, which was very exciting. Another falcon we have is peregrine falcon. These are rare. They are breeding on large structures like bridges and skyscrapers in our region. And just today, we think we found another pair in West Hollywood, of all places. So they're very hard to detect. They spend most of their time perched high up in little niches and buildings. And then they go out on these forays, very quick flights, often high in the air, looking for birds. Then we have some uncommon owls, including the barn owl. The barn owl is probably a little more common than the 0 pairs we're monitoring, but it's strictly nocturnal. It doesn't build a nest structure. It nests in cavities and up in palm trees. And it's just really been too hard to actually monitor this species given our methodology and just the difficulties of surveying at night in a lot of our study area. Western screech owl has been detected every year, but we almost never record nesting. We know it's nesting in the area, particularly in Mount Washington, where they're using cavities of walnuts, our native California black walnut. They also occur in oak and sycamore woodland, including trees like this sycamore, I believe, in Benedict Canyon. All right, so LA is a big and it's a busy place. How are raptors using it? Let us see. So the raptor species, as you know, are found across a wide area of wide range of urbanization, from canyons in the Santa Monica's, like this one you may recognize in Sherman Oaks, Sunstone. These can be very productive, but they're also using these very urban, kind of generic residential areas, such as good old Craner Avenue in North Hollywood. Cooper's hawks are particularly common in those areas. We've even found raptors in the most urban parts of LA, such as Koreatown, Mid-City. And then this year, we had the delight of finally finding one of our downtown Westlake pairs nesting. This was atop basically a gargoyle type of structure in MacArthur Park, near MacArthur Park. And I noticed in my email, I have a 2017 email from Brad Rumble, who some of you know, saying, I've heard that red-tailed hawks nest on the northwest side of MacArthur Park, but never found one. And that email just sat in my inbox, and I never really thought about it again until earlier this spring. I was driving down Wilshire, and I happened to see an adult red-tail perched across from this nest. I pulled over and did some scanning and eventually found the strands of those palm fronds, and that's how I found this nest. Looks like this one's feeding a juvenile, or a pigeon or a rat. Then we have our Cooper's hawks. Cooper's hawks spend a lot of time in the urban environment, and possibly one of the reasons they do this is there's an abundance of anthropogenic water. This is just a classic midsummer SoCal scene of a nice swimming pool with a trio of juvenile Cooper's hawks, or at least 2. So our nests are found really throughout our study area, and as this snippet will show you, we have really good coverage of nests. We also use some online crowd community science platforms, including iNaturalist. I curate the Los Angeles Biodiversity Initiative on iNaturalist. And so, as Jerry and Narit will attest, I'm endlessly trolling this thing and looking for, oh, look, someone found an immature red-shouldered hawk, and it's June. We better check this out. So this is a great source of information. So often we follow pairs and they lead us to the nest. So this is an example of that. This is up in the hills, kind of along Mulholland near Beverly Hills, Sherman Oaks, where we just could barely see the nest, but we saw the pair perched like this, and that was a good giveaway. Sometimes it's really obvious how we find our hawk nests, and this is just a car that was parked under a red-tailed hawk nest in the Village Green area northeast of Culver City. Resident had told us they'd seen a hawk, but no nest until we found it. Once we're in an active territory, we scan the trees looking for nest structures, and often we take these finger photos just to orient us. And this one's pointing to a giant red-tailed nest in El Sereno, which I think was active again this year. The tips from neighbors are very helpful. We do outreach to social media, including Nextdoor. We ask for sightings of hawks and owls. We bother our friends throughout the season. Maybe you do too. These help us find the new territories, and it's been really exciting as we find these. All right, so let's get into some results. In 2023, we rechecked or discovered a total of 549 raptor territories. So not all of these were active. These were accumulated in the last 7 years. So some of these were ones that we had a feeling were inactive, but we did make an effort to confirm that, which was a lot of work. And increasingly, you can see Cooper's hawks. We have over 200 territories of Cooper's hawks now, and we haven't even covered more than a third of the San Fernando Valley, and that's where it seems like they're the most dense. This was up from 185 last year. We also blew through our total of red-shouldered hawk or red-tailed hawk territories by about 20. We got to 184. We're now up to 55 red shoulder, and we doubled our known great horned owl territories. And that was something that was particularly interesting this year. How many great horned owls we found? We're not really sure what is going on with it. We think it's possible that hawks, particularly red tails, or others, may take a pause certain years and possibly allow great horns to come into their territories. But we did also document situations where we had a great horn take over a red-tailed hawk, and then the red-tailed hawk nested across the canyon. So it's not really a clean one-for-one swap there. We had 4 American kestrel territories and 2 peregrine falcon territories. So compared to 2022, we located additional territories, and most of these were active nests, including, like I mentioned, these species switches where one species takes over another. It's not just great horned owls. We have switches between red-shouldered hawk and red-tailed hawk and Cooper's hawk, and it gets pretty interesting. So like I showed you in the previous slide, those were what we were checking. Now, the ones that were actually monitored and active are these. So we had 12 new Cooper's hawk territories or pairs, which is actually a decline from last year. So I think what's happening is Cooper's hawk may have dipped this year, but also we're just running out of new territories of Cooper's hawks because we found so many. Same number of new great horned owls we saw last year. That really didn't change. We're still climbing. And we added just 15 brand new active red-tailed hawk territories that we didn't know about this year, and then 5 red shoulders. So looking at each species, this is a map showing active nests and the outcome, whether they fledged. And we found that red-tailed hawks maintain more active territories in 2023 than in 2022. And we also saw that 2023 saw the sort of like a bounce back, recovery in fledged nests from that of the prior year. So, but there were still a lot of pairs that were absent from known territories, or even nests that appeared to be abandoned mid-season. And that's where that gap between the red and the green, or the brown and the green, if you're colorblind, accounts for it. It's basically the active nest versus the ones that actually fledged young. So there's still a pretty sizable gap. Looking at Cooper's hawk, we're seeing a decline in active territories, particularly from this high in 2021. We're also seeing fewer fledged young. We're still seeing a lot of birds, right? We're still fledging almost 80 young. Almost 80 territories are nesting, and a lot of these have 2 and 3 young. But this dip is a little possibly troubling. Cooper's hawk is still a very common bird, but we don't know if it'll continue to decline. But if you'll notice, unlike redtail, which has a lot of active territories that don't actually fledge young, they just sort of fly around, maybe copulate, call to each other, build a nest, but don't do anything. Most Cooper's hawks get to raising young. So you'll see that the levels of the blue to the red are a lot closer in Cooper's hawks each year. So red-shouldered hawk, our active territory count continues to climb, and we even bumped up the fledged young a little bit, which is nice. But still, we have like almost twice as many territories are active without fledging young, and the fates are various. Sometimes the nest will fall down, sometimes the birds will build a nest and not actually fledge young. So just kind of interesting how Cooper's hawk seem to really be consistent in raising young where they build their nests, whereas red-tailed and red-shoulder, there's a bigger gap in what's actually fledged. Okay, so let's look at some line graphs. So as I said, if you compare the number of territories that fledged young for each species, we seem to be sort of holding steady where Cooper's hawks are fledging proportionally more young out of their territories than the other 2 species. We just looked at hawks here and not great horned owl. You can read the report for the details about this. It kind of looks like if you look overall, there's a dip since the high in 2020, which was the height of COVID, which is kind of interesting. Whether that lockdown in the spring of 2020 had something to do with all these fledged territories that year, I don't know. We'll have to see. Okay, next slide. So then there's this question of reoccupancy, which is kind of neat. It's of the ones that were active last year, how many are active again this year? And it turns out that there's not much change in red-tailed hawks, right? It's just they're sort of holding steady around 75, 80% of their territories are active again. But Cooper's hawks seem to fluctuate a bit more. And red-shouldered hawk, we just don't have a lot of data for them because they're much less common. So that could be why the number or the graph jumps around so much. But overall, Cooper's hawk reoccupancy is pretty low. It's around 50% versus over around 80% for red shoulder and red tail the last couple of years. Now, whether this will hold, I'm not really sure. I think we're getting better at monitoring and checking since 2020. So I would believe those 2020 and beyond numbers. And I do think there's something going on with Cooper's hawks moving each year, but still sort of surprising. Not all the Cooper's hawks move, right? So 50% of them stayed. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then we can look at the success of territories. So how many fledged again from the prior year? And in that case, the numbers are a little different. The pattern's a little different, whereas a higher percentage of red-tailed hawks fledged again. So there you can think of them as being sort of champion fledgers year after year, where the red shoulders and Coopers are a little shakier. They're down just below 50% fledging again from that prior year. That has something to do with the fidelity of that species, red-tailed hawk, to its territory. We don't actually know for sure what the fate is of each pair because we don't have them color banded. So all we can say from this is that of the ones we followed the year before, this is how many fledged again. Okay, let's start looking at productivity. So we have mean chick. Let's see. Did you skip one, Marie? Go back a second.
I did. Sorry, it was an error it was a 2022 slide lingering. So
oops. Okay. So let's look at mean
fault.
chick per nest. Yeah, as you can see, we went over this with a fine tooth comb, but things slipped through. Mean chick per nest looks like it might be dropping, since 2019. And I don't know if this is a real trend or not. This is why we want to continue this study year after year, but it does seem on the average that the number of chicks per nest may be falling on average for all species. Yeah, it's just something to watch. You can also look at how different these species are. So Cooper's hawk for the last couple of years has been well over 2 chicks per nest, up near 2.5, whereas red-tailed hawk in the last couple of years has been under 2 chicks per nest, and then poor red-shouldered hawk has almost always been under 2 chicks per nest and even approaching 1.5. So this is just a metric showing like how many young it's churning out of each nest, but also like what that trend is over time. So we'll see. So here's something that caught our eye last year. I don't know if this is a real pattern yet, but one thing that's been found with goshawk is that drought years tend to result in fewer chicks the following spring. And so all of our rain falls in winter in Southern California, unlike where goshawks breed, which is the far northern hemisphere, which is rainy in the summer. I decided to plot the prior year's rainfall in terms of its deviation from baseline, from average, which is that red line, versus the percentage of nests with single chicks. And there does seem to be, at least in the first few years, this sort of inverse relationship where we have in these dry years where the rainfall dips low, we have a lot of single chick nests. And this is looking at just red-tailed hawk. I don't know if this is a real trend. And as a lot of you know, this past year was so anomalous with this gigantic tsunami of rain, particularly in the spring, that it just flew off the charts. And so the pattern didn't quite hold. We were hoping to really nail down this pattern, but, El Nino had other plans. So right now I want to pass this over to Narit, and she'll take us through the rest of the talk looking at threats to our urban raptors.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, I'm going to share a little bit about the threats that they face. A lot of these are human caused, but I'll also talk about the ways in which humans can help our urban raptors through rescue and rehabilitation. So a lot of the major threats include habitat degradation and loss, just our development of our urban environment, even though they're adapting to that. Continued climate change and drought, as Dan was just talking about these precipitation patterns and the productivity drop, although we had a very rainy year, we are facing a mega drought, and it will be really interesting as this study continues to see how that impacts our raptors. Building collisions and car collisions are real big, especially for our Cooper's hawks, but affect all species. It may be that is why Cooper's hawk evolved such large broods, is because they have a pretty high mortality rate for juveniles. We'll also talk about rodenticides, construction disturbance, and tree trimming. This was unfortunate, hopefully not so graphic, but a sad photo. We lost a red-shouldered hawk in Stone Canyon this year. It was found deceased by a resident, and we suspect rodenticide poisoning for this one, which will go to the Natural History Museum. Friends of Griffith Park has been funding testing for many of the deceased raptors that we've found in our study area, and they have all tested positive for rodenticides. So definitely a major threat to our urban raptors, especially as they adapt to urban prey and eat rats. So if you haven't, or your neighbors haven't stopped using rat poison, please do use other methods, and we'll talk about that more later. Tree trimming continues to be an issue in the urban area because of the storms this winter, a lot of people were very cognizant of the ways in which trees can fall and cause damage. So it seemed like just a whole rash of tree trimming in the early nesting season this year. This photo is from last year, but it just continues to be a really good and sad example. This was a 10-year nest of a red-tailed pair in Cazador in Mount Washington area, where it was illegally trimmed out. And so this is the sad adult red tail looking for their nest. And this was during nesting season. The juveniles were still coming back to feed at the nest at night. Thankfully, sometimes trimming doesn't have to be as disruptive, especially if it's done at the right time of year. So Courtney, who as our volunteer coordinator from prior years, worked with a group called Tree Care for Birds, and it's connected to an arborist society to teach a tree care for wildlife workshop for arborists here in Los Angeles. And I think that education is helping. We did see a sign out in Culver City that shows that tree maintenance was delayed because they identified a Cooper's hawk nest, and this is from West Coast arborists. So the more tree trimmers learn about the law, it is illegal to remove a raptor nest even when it's not active, and it's illegal to conduct construction too close to a raptor nest, or certainly in the tree where the raptor nest is. It's both a violation of federal and state law. So educate your friends and neighbors. If you have to do trimming or work or construction, it's best to do it outside the nesting season, say September, October, somewhere in there. We were very grateful this year for assistance from the Los Angeles Animal Services SMART team, which stands for Specialized Mobile Animal Rescue Unit. This is one of their photos indicating the kind of work they get into. So in the cases where we did have young owls, especially this year, knocked out of the nest by winds or by other issues, they're actually able to take these owlets and other young raptors that are on the ground and get them back into their nests, which is wonderful. They also helped us with capture and transport, which was really fantastic. So a big thank you to Officer Navarro and the whole SMART team for that partnership, which has been really wonderful. This was a photo from an owlet that was rescued and placed back in the tree, just to give you a sense of the kind of work they do. So they have trucks that can, reach very high, and then they also have trained team members who can scale and get up even to a 75-foot tree. As I mentioned earlier, collisions and injuries are really common with our raptors, especially Cooper's hawks. They get into all kinds of trouble, but we've also had red tails that were hit by cars or also injured. And so in these cases, we can't just leave them or put them back, and we coordinate with the Ojai Raptor Center, which is one of the top raptor rehabilitation centers in the whole area. They do just incredible work. So if you haven't checked them out before, I would, and support their work. They repair all kinds of fractures. I've seen them, they can even do what's called imping, which is where if a bird has, due to injury, lost a lot of feathers, they can sew new feathers on. I mean, it's really just, their work is incredible. And so we're honored to work with them. And a lot of wildlife rehabilitation and rescue can have sad outcomes, and it can be very difficult work, but sometimes we get to share success stories. And we have one from this year, actually just from today, that I wanted to tell you about. So a resident found this red-shouldered hawk in a jacuzzi. I think it was actually someone working on a property, didn't know what to do with it. It was almost drowned, really in bad shape. They got a hold of CLAW, Citizens for Los Angeles Wildlife, a wonderful organization. And I'm sorry, they didn't get a hold of CLAW. They surrendered it to Fire Station 97. And so LAFD got a hold of CLAW, who knew to call me. So the fire station, the captain and the staff there, they were able to place a towel around the hawk and keep it safe until I could get there. I then transported it to Ojai Raptor Center. Under Ojai Raptor Center's direction, because this was long after hours, the hawk was blow dried. So here she is, fluffy. This was before and after, quite a difference. And then taken to Ojai Raptor Center for care. So she, it turned out, had a foxtail in her eye, which may have been why she ended up crashing into the jacuzzi, probably while she was going after prey. And so she was treated for the eye injury, given antibiotics, et cetera, veterinary care. And so after a couple of weeks, she recovered, and we were able to take her and release her. So this was actually just this morning, and this is a video of the release. Releases happen very fast, so you usually can only catch them on a slow-mo, but I'll play it once more for you. So there she is flying free. It was really wonderful to see, and the firefighters who assisted were there. We didn't have the address of where she was found, so the closest we knew was the fire station, and we released her at LAFD 97. What was really incredible about it is, and I've seen this one other time with a release, as soon as she was out of that box and further away from us and let out a call, her mate came from what looked like probably a full mile away, just swooping in to meet her, and they started calling to each other and flying together. We think their juvenile may have even come to meet them too, because we saw 3 birds up there. Then they flew over and landed in a tree. Here she is preening, finally free and healed, which was really wonderful to see. And then this is her on the right. And if you look closely, you'll see this is her mate on the left. Sorry, I wasn't able to get a better photo for you. They're a bit cryptic sometimes, but just really amazing to see them reunited and to see that success story. So how can you support raptors and wildlife in your yard or in your neighborhood? As I said before, do not use rodenticides or poisons. There are a lot of better options with traps. There are electric traps that we're using now at UCLA that can notify you when they go off. Lots of different alternatives to help you not use poisons. They're really terrible, as you know, for mountain lions, like our late P22, for all kinds of wildlife, not just raptors. Make sure that any trimming or removing trees or construction happens not during nesting season, which is generally February through August. But I will note for you backyard folks that hummingbirds nest in the winter. So ideally, having either your arborist or a biologist come do a nesting survey is even better. So you can really confirm that you're not, destroying any bird nests. But for raptors, September or October is a good time to do that work. If you do have to conduct work during the nesting season, as I mentioned, hire a biologist to do a nesting bird survey. In general, in terms of supporting wildlife, avoid leaf blowers besides being noisy. That leaf litter that they're clearing up under the bushes can really provide a lot of habitat for insects and the birds that eat them and support them, which does include some of our raptors, actually. Kestrels will catch beetles and insects, and Cooper's hawk will hunt on the ground too. Planting native plants and creating habitat is really valuable. And then of course you can help with outreach and educating your neighbors. I know a lot of you are volunteers, but this final presentation is also open, and I think we have many people who are not yet volunteers for the raptor study. So getting started watching wildlife, binoculars are key. There's a great review in the New York Times that our own Dr. Cooper wrote about some good beginner sets. If you don't have some, definitely key gear to have. And then there's a lot of good apps that you can download. eBird is really helpful for keeping track of your sightings. Merlin is great for IDing birds by sound or by going through, I saw something that was red and the size of a duck, and what did I see? BirdNet has good audio identification, as does Merlin, and iNaturalist, as we mentioned, is a great resource for having local scientists help you ID all kinds of things you see, plants, animals, etc. There's also a specialized raptor ID app from Hawkwatch International that's really fantastic if you want to get to know your local raptor species and how to tell them apart. So the Raptor ID app, as I mentioned, and then of course books or field guides like Birds of Prey of the West or Hawks from Every Angle is a great one, since most of the time we only get to see hawks way up in the sky. So those are some tools to help you get started. And for our volunteers, we'll be emailing out some of these resources afterwards, but I'll place some in the chat during the Q&A for those who are visitors. And of course, you can help by becoming a volunteer. So you can fill out the application on the study website. We'll drop that in the chat too later. friendsofgriffithpark.org/raptor study. And we would love to see you. We'll be back at it in February with training. This is a photo from the 2023 training. Some of you may have been there. And at this point, we are going to open it up for questions. We really want to make sure to thank Jerry and the whole Friends of Griffith Park team who provide all the support for the LA Raptor study and this important program. I'm going to facilitate a Q&A, and I'll start taking questions from the Q&A section of Zoom. So please make sure to enter your questions there. This is a webinar format, so with so many attendees, we find it's a little better to do it this way, so you won't be able to raise your hand. So just ask your questions there, we'll address them. You can put comments in the chat and we'll add some links there as well. So before I start answering questions, I also wanted to echo my colleagues' comments and share some gratitude for Courtney's work on this study. I know many of you have worked very closely with her over the years, and her legacy will continue through you. She's really brought a lot to the study over the years. So I do want to thank her. I'm also going to put a link in the chat to what's called a kudo board. It's basically a place where you can add your notes of thank you. So for those who want to wish her well or express their gratitude for working with her as a volunteer, that link will be in the chat as well. And then I'll send it out in a follow-up email to the volunteers too. So with that, we will shift to Q&A. Thank you to Jen Rose for this adorable Cooper's Hawk juvenile who looks very confused, but hopefully we can answer all of your questions. All right, so getting started. We start with just a comment, and comments are okay too. Just a note that a lot of these species seem to have high reproductive rates in 2021 during the quarantine time. What we will say about that is that there is a global study of what's called the anthropause and that time when there was a lot less human activity. So we can try and find a link for you, or you can Google it. There's a lot of scientists collaborating on understanding the impacts of that time. So the first question I'm going to direct to Dan. In the mapping that you did of rainfall versus single chick nests, what months were included in winter rainfall?
Yeah, I got winter rainfall from I think LA Weather Almanac or something, but I think it's October through April. Great.
The next question, I guess, would be for me. What camera do you use to take the photos? I use a Nikon P1000. It has an incredible zoom, 3000 millimeter zoom, which is really important because it allows me to take photos of raptors from a safe distance away that's less disruptive. I can stand a whole football field away and get those close-up shots. So I recommend, if you're going to take photos of wildlife, that you invest in something with a lot of zoom so you can really capture their natural behavior and not be disruptive. All right, if you see construction around a nest, who do we call and what is considered a safe distance? So you call, and I'm going to start with my multitasking of putting things in the chat. So you call CalTip. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. It's 1-888-334-CalTip. But here's the website. So this is California Fish and Wildlife, and it's, I think, a 24/7 line, and the wardens really will respond. So if you catch somebody in action, call CalTip. The next thing you should do is, if someone is actively disrupting an active nest, is document. So take video and photo if you feel safe doing that, because they won't be able to prosecute and have fines and all of that if there's no proof. And so they need someone to serve as a witness if they're not able to get there while the work is in progress.
And I'll point out, we did have a nest that was being trimmed while the owlets, it was a great horned owl, were in the nest, being trimmed by a private contractor. And it was, I believe the trimming was stopped and the owls fledged this year, which is exciting. So it does work.
So it does work. It does really help to, alert us and alert. So you should call CalTip first, but then you should also call us so we're aware and can document in the study. And sometimes we can also help if we're available. We've come out to educate tree trimmers and talk to them from the biologist perspective as well. Speaking of the biologist perspective, Dan, do you want to answer the question about the recommended distance from raptor nests?
Yeah. So California Fish and Wildlife recommends that surveys and monitoring take place within 500 feet of raptor nests where they're deemed active. And, 500 feet is just a good rule of thumb. This doesn't mean that if there's disturbance within 500 feet, it'll be catastrophic or even affect the raptors. We also had an example where we had a red-tailed hawk nest. This was in the Sepulveda Basin, which had young, I believe, and they literally took the next tree down. They took the tree completely out while the young were in the nest. birds tend to be more sensitive while they're building nests and incubating than when they have young. In other words, they'll sit a lot tighter with their eggs, and when they're young, they're not going to leave for anything. So some of this may have something to do with the fact that they're already young. Of course, we don't always know that a bird is planning to nest somewhere when a tree is being trimmed. So some of this is hard, but yeah, I would say keep 500 feet as a rule of thumb.
Absolutely. But when in doubt, call a biologist. Lots of folks like Dan do consult on construction projects and can provide that type of recommendations. Allison asks, will Courtney be at the party Saturday? She actually has a family obligation, so we're not sure if she's going to make it, but I did just put the link, and apologies, when I first put the CalTip link, it went to just hosts and panelists, which doesn't serve you very well. So I've now put it to everyone, so that CalTip link is there, so check the chat. And I also just put the link for the Kudo board where you can share some thank yous to Courtney, so please do. Lynn asks a very fair question. Is it possible the decline in the number of chicks per nest is simply because it's hard to ID the number of chicks per nest in a very high nest? I would say that that is true. It is hard, but our number of volunteers and the level of training of our volunteers continues to increase. So with the kind of similar level of effort, I think that the decline would have, you know, the same or less margin of error each year, and so probably not. Dan, as our lead scientist, would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, that's right. We're basically making the same mistakes year after year in the same proportions.
Excellent.
And that's the key. That's the whole key for Christmas bird count and eBird and everything else. It's kind of gets swept up.
Absolutely. All right. I'm just gonna close out a few of those other questions. Okay, did that one. All right, so I need to know where my Coopers go when they're not here. Banding, like UW Rosenfeld does, GPS, are those techniques in our future? So I love how passionately you feel about needing to know. It's a question I'm very curious about as well. And I am looking into possibly doing some tracking with GPS. I've been training under Pete Bloom, who's really the top raptor biologist around. He's been doing this for 50 years. So we may get some funding in a future year and harness and tag some of our raptors. However, I think we can speak in general to where they go because some studies have been done not too far from us. So Pete's been doing this down in Orange County, and he and colleagues found that for red-tailed hawks, the juveniles actually leave and go as far as Great Basin before returning to nest very close to their natal territory or where they were hatched. So that tends to be the pattern. And what I'm curious about is what is happening with our Cooper's hawks? Are they doing something similar? Or are they really hanging around? So I'm going to see if I can find out. But the red tails, I think most of them are going up to Great Basin. All right. Harnawaz, I'll message you separately about like the cost of the camera. I don't want to get too into that in our time here, but I appreciate your question. And Dan is typing an answer about the safe distance.
Oh, so you can see when I'm typing, huh?
It does say Dan Cooper is typing an answer.
I am typing.
Yeah, probably because I'm the host. I don't know that everyone can see that. All right. Can you share the link and phone number for CalTip again? Yes, I put it in the chat, which you should be able to see, but I'm going to type it here in an answer to your question, Sarah. Thank you. Oh, chat is disabled. That's not good. I show that I can chat to everyone. Can somebody confirm whether or not they can see the links I'm putting in the chat? Because that's going to be challenging if you can't. And I'll see if I can enable chat. I did not deliberately disable it. Panelists can chat with, attendees can chat with everyone. Okay, let's try that. I'm going to put the links again. Now you should be able to use the chat and see my links.
Yay.
So, all right, we can see the links in the chat. Hooray! Thank you for answering, a number of you. All right. Odd question. How much statistical noise do you suspect the data has across all of these years from 2017 to today? Dan, I'm looking at you.
Where? I don't see this question. Where is this question? I'm looking at.
Yeah, don't look at the Q&A, just answer the ones I ask you.
Can you
I'm
ask it
handling the
again?
Q&A, so I already closed the question because I'm giving it to you to answer.
Oh, what was the
Yeah,
question?
so how much statistical noise do you think there is in our data across all 7 years?
3. No, I don't. We really don't know. 7 years is not a lot of years, so it's really hard to say. But with these community science projects, noise is inevitable. I think the key is there's this roughly the same amount of noise each year. That's what we're going for. We're trying to get about the same number of volunteers, as Nurit said, the same amount of training. We have different numbers of nests each year, but not dramatically different numbers. So it's really hard to know.
Thank you. I don't know if you paid Travis to ask this question, but here's a question that's a great tee up for your PhD research, Dan. Dr. Cooper, is there a rural area that serves as a control to this mostly urban study? Tell us what you've learned about urban versus non-urban areas and raptors.
Yeah, so I did study this for my PhD at UCLA. We looked at the upper Malibu Creek watershed out in Calabasas, Thousand Oaks, Agoura Hills. And we found some similar patterns to LA, which was that over the last 10 or 20 years, Cooper's hawks have dramatically increased in urban areas and have sort of been erased from natural areas. I know in Orange County, they've been monitoring some of their wildland parks like Trabuco Canyon and Irvine Open Space, and they found huge declines in raptors from natural habitats, whereas urban and suburban raptor populations seem to be holding their own. So it's a really funny thing. We think of the wildlands and the hills and undeveloped areas as being the safe areas for raptors, but in times of drought, the reverse may be true. And wildfire also plays a role, particularly since my study area out here in the Malibu Creek watershed was the heart of the Woolsey fire, where it burned basically 100% of the native oaks.
Thank you. So Chip notes that he's been following the same red-tailed hawk nests since the beginning of the survey, and they've produced 2 fledglings pretty consistently, and wants to know if this is the same pair every year, and if not, do the youngsters come back and take over the nest? Generally, we don't tag our raptors, so we can't tell you 100%, but generally it's the same pair. So raptors mate for life for the most part, besides Cooper's hawks, who have some interesting extra pair paternity behavior and slip into other nests. Our raptors are generally monogamous mate for life. So you're seeing the same pair over and over again, unless there was the death of a mate. I talked about how today when we released that red-shouldered hawk, even from a mile away, her mate came swooping in and hung out with her in the tree and talked a bunch. So it is most likely the same pair. That said, we do, from other studies that folks have done, we do know that the juveniles will come and nest in the area. So the other nests close to your nest could very easily be the children of that pair that you've been monitoring. And as Dan mentioned earlier in his presentation, we do sometimes have other species take over. So obviously, if you find an owl in your red-tailed nest one day, now you've got different birds.
And I think, real quick, I think every
Yeah.
year people ask, where do these young birds go? We don't know for sure. There have been studies banding young birds that show they disperse into the Great Basin. Red-tailed hawks will disperse in the Great Basin. Cooper's hawks can disperse hundreds of miles. They do come back. We also see the prior year's young often in the next canyon over. That's something we noticed a lot in the Sherman Oaks area that have a lot of very narrow canyons. In that Studio City, Sherman Oaks area, we'll often see an active nest in one, and then the next canyon over, we have a 1 or 2 year old bird just hanging around, waiting to
Yeah.
find, presumably.
In a similar kind of vein, someone was checking on that about building nests in the same area. And yes, in general, raptors do come back and build near their natal territory, even though they travel so far. So that's a yes. Angela notes that she had a great horned owl nest that appeared to fail during the storms, but then restarted and was successful. So relatively late owl fledglings, long after most of the great horned owls were done. How common is it for them to actually try again when there's a failure or a nest, collapse or other problem during the season? And any other nests that we know of where that happened this year?
Yeah, we were just looking at that. It's going to be in the final report. I just made a table of a couple dozen disturbance incidences, I guess you could call them. So that includes everything from, we had a great horned owl nest flood in Elysian Park. I had one in Ojai flood this past year too. We've had nests blow down. We've had trees get trimmed. A houses under construction across the street. Maybe that's a disturbance
Yeah.
or not.
But I think, Dan, she was asking, do we know of any other birds where there was a disturbance, but they restarted? So
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah, we do. So we know that I can think of one Cooper's and one red tail. I think Beechwood Canyon was disturbed, and then the red tail there then successfully fledged young in a different nearby nest later in the year after being disturbed. So yeah, I was expecting a lot of bad news when that happened, but it turns out that they're pretty resilient.
And also with Cooper's new nests in the same tree in a different location.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Icases.
Yeah, definitely. Coopers will rebuild. And as you'll read in the final report, they do move around a lot within the same territory. They tend to change nest site more often than our red tails. Angela also shared a hot tip for anyone traveling near a hawkwatch site. This fall migration is on right now, and it's a great way to practice your ID skills. So that includes Golden Gate Raptor Observatory as a great spot in California, but you can also travel to other migration areas. So thanks for sharing that, Angela. Definitely. I actually still have not traveled to a major raptor migration, and I hope to do that someday. So Hernawaz also asks, do we suspect that raptors in LA are subject to the luxury effect in response to climatic conditions and to the city landscape? So that's actually what my research is going to be looking into. So we're going to take the data from the raptor study and really look at all the different conditions in our city, including income, that affect where they're choosing to nest. So tree canopy, building density, all of these kinds of factors, and really find out what those relationships are. So stay tuned, probably another 2 years, I think, before that's really all done, but I'll definitely share the results of that research with you. You know, anecdotally, I would say we definitely have a high density of raptors in some of the wealthier areas of our study, which in LA coincides with the hillside neighborhoods with a lot of dense vegetation. So that may be more a factor of the fact that it's the Santa Monica Mountains with a lot of density of habitat, but that does sometimes correlate with income areas like Bel Air and, you know, some of the canyon neighborhoods. Dan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, there are always exceptions, like some of the most expensive neighborhoods in LA are in parts of Santa Monica that have almost no raptor use. So it really depends on proximity to the coast, depends on the historical biogeography of the landscape in which the neighborhood exists. So if you have an area like, let's say Slauson, near Normandy, which would have been sort of a coastal prairie area that wouldn't have supported big trees, it's really never going to support big trees, like an area such as the area around Wilshire Country Club, where you have a lot more surface water and just very different soils. So it gets pretty complicated in LA, but this is a great area to study those patterns.
Yeah, and separate from the raptor study, Dan and I both collaborated on a study looking at neighborhood biodiversity in LA, which I'll add to the chat in case folks are curious. We definitely found there's a very big range and variation in biodiversity among indicator species by neighborhood in different parts of LA, and certainly things like tree canopy and you know, vegetation have a big role there. All right. How long do the chicks typically stay in the nest before they fledge for the different raptors in this study? Is there a good book or resource for learning about the different stages? There definitely are good resources. There's a lot. Things like field guides like Birds of Prey of the West definitely go into all of the breeding patterns and everything. I should know offhand, but I actually would have to do a quick Google to remember exactly how many weeks for each, which I can do later if there's time. But that information is definitely available. And Shelley, I can send you a couple resources. Dan, do you have them memorized? Or
No,
Jerry?
I have no memory for numbers like that.
Yeah.
I
I'll
Really
generally
just
good.
check.
I
Jerry?
generally just say 30 to 35 days for incubation and another 30 to 35 days before they fledge.
That sounds
That sounds
very
about
reasonable.
right. Yeah. But we can confirm that for you. But that's generally available on a number of sites. So there's the general field guides like Birds of Prey. There's a fantastic Cooper's Hawk book out by Robert Rosenfield that I recommend that goes into a lot of great details about Cooper's Hawk. So happy to send some
So
book
that bird
recommendations.
nest and egg field guide, is it a Peterson field guide, Nareet?
Oh yeah, that's for like how to identify nests and
Yeah.
eggs. So that's got all kinds of songbirds and stuff like that. But yeah, there are definitely some good raptor specific books. One of the interesting behaviors we really picked up on from this study is that when they fledge, raptors don't tend to just leave. So I found in observing that I observed this first with red-tailed hawks, but now I've seen it with other species as well. But the juveniles for weeks afterward will come back and be fed by the parents, especially at sunset before going to bed or nest. They will come back to the nest and the parents will bring food and feed them at the nest. So even once they've fledged, they're still using that nest. I think great horned owls stay together the longest as a family. So they'll really move from their nest site. And we've seen this at multiple areas. They'll move like say 300 yards away and find an area where they'll start teaching them how to fly and doing practice flights. They'll all roost together in the same tree. They really stay together quite a long time after fledging. And the parents seem to play quite an active role in teaching them to hunt and fly, etc.
And also, I don't think people brought it up here, but I've been getting emails and texts about breeding behavior people are seeing now. So pairs flying together, calling to each other, even rebuilding nests. Kat Halsey, who is our enthusiastic Elysian Park monitor, is seeing daily hawks rehabbing nests right now in September. So our eyes are really being open to a lot of these behaviors that we weren't really realizing was going on until we really people like you have our volunteers are just our eyes and ears on the ground and are just watching these birds year round and just learning each year more about their ecology, which has been really rewarding.
Yeah, and although we don't solicit tips in the off season, we welcome them. So David just mentioned that however long the chicks were around, it's not long enough. And watching the three Cooper's siblings fly and up and down the street was really magical. So I definitely feel that we all, I think, are really drawn to these incredible birds. So I personally don't mind a flooded inbox full of hawk sightings, even when it's off season. So it's interesting to us to see if some of these parents are becoming more residential rather than migrating and sticking around. So if you see your local Coopers in the middle of the winter, let me know. I'll be interested to hear about it. All
I
right.
appreciate everyone's uploads to iNaturalist. I know a lot of you are active iNat users, and it's really nice to kind of keep track of your sightings through that too.
Yeah, definitely. I think more and more scientists are drawing on community science data like that to do really significant research. And so it's not just a fun way to get IDs for stuff you see, it's also really contributing. So thanks to everyone there. We don't have any more questions in the Q&A, but I know some of you might be thinking about them. So we'll give you a moment in case there are any more you'd like to ask us before we close tonight.
Harley asked in chat, are there any Southern California migration hotspots? And it's interesting, Carly, there don't seem to be big raptor migration hotspots. We documented a fairly small raptor migration coinciding with a very large turkey vulture migration through the Kern Valley about almost 20 years ago now. And that can be seen at the northern end of Kelso Valley Road, south of Highway 178, which is just east of Lake Isabella. And that area kind of funnels birds coming down the Sierra Nevada as they're trying to get out to the Mojave Desert and down into Latin America. So that whole sort of East Kern County, Jawbone Canyon can be really good this time of year. And then, so Swainson's hawk, particularly northbound migration through Palm Springs, possibly after these birds are coming from Anza Borrego, They're moving up into our area, and they seem to be moving east around the LA basin and almost bypassing our study area entirely. So, and that's in spring. So places like, the famous songbird migration area, Bear Divide, up above between Silmar and Santa Clarita is one place. But any of these foothill areas in the spring, you might see some northbound Swainson's hawks.
Yeah, and I just put the Bear Divide link in the chat. If you haven't been up there and you're a birder, you really should go. It's a very special place that was just discovered in recent years, where a lot of migratory songbirds are funneling through this one area of the mountain. It's just stunning. So there's a lot of resources on that website. Definitely check that out. Small Raptor ID moment while we're waiting for more questions. So when you do see Swainson's fly over, one of the big things that will help you know it's not a red-tailed hawk is that they do not have dark marks on the inside of their shoulder. So this patagial area is dark on a red-tailed hawk, and it's one of the key ID marks. And so if you see a hawk that looks like a red tail soaring above you, but it's light colored here, without that dark mark that's telltale, that could very well be a Swainson's hawk. So keep an eye out during migration. They also have particularly long wings. When they're sitting, their wings are longer than their tail tip, but that can be hard to gauge up in the sky. So just watch those patagial areas. All right, any other questions? And Carly is checking out Bear Divide, awesome. All right, we'll do last call, going once, going twice. Otherwise, we're really glad you all joined us, and I'll give it to Jerry to close out tonight.
Thanks, Nuri and Dan. Yeah, let me end this on a positive note, even though it's on the subject of rodenticides, which Nurit talked about. AB 1322 will be eliminating the first gen anticoagulant difazanone. Thanks to our Assembly member Laura Friedman, pushed along by our Senator Anthony Portantino, is now on the governor's desk to pass, which is great news. And so it will be added to the moratorium along with the second gens, which have been on the moratorium list since January of 2021. So that's really good news. Besides that, I just want to thank all of the volunteers again for their participation. I mean, we can't do this without the community science support that we get. And I hope we'll see all of the volunteers at the Raptor dinner Saturday evening at 5.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I just posted the Raptor Study website in case anyone didn't have it, where we will post the recording. A couple people were asking about the recording. If Zoom allows me to get emails from those who registered, I'll send the follow-up and the recording to all of you who attended and not just our volunteer list. So I'll check on that. But if you don't receive an email, definitely keep an eye on the Raptor website. And thank you for the thank yous in the chat.
Okay, good night, everyone. Have a great
Good
weekend.
night, all.
See you next year, if not sooner.